Thanks for tuning in to the Drive On podcast, where we're focused on giving hope and strength to the entire military community. Whether you're a veteran, active duty, guard, reserve, or a family member, this podcast will share inspirational stories and resources that are useful to you. I'm your host, Scott DeLucio, and now let's get on with the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Drive On podcast. Today, my guest is Mark Weisman. Mark has spent over 3 decades researching religion throughout the world, and he's combined his experience with religion and psychology to offer hope for those suffering from depression and PTSD. He spent countless hours working with returning veterans to overcome the symptoms of PTSD by building successful coping mechanisms that lead to happier lives. So welcome to the show, Mark. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Well, thank you. And thank you, Scott, for inviting me and having me on your show. A little bit about me. 30 years, I've gone through originally part of the Christian church where I was ordained as a chaplain, done countless hours of work with our brethren coming back from conflict. I was a formerly active duty Marine, long time ago. And so I understand the conflict. I also spent about 30 years in the private security industry all around the world doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And when I came back, tried to wrap my mind around what worked, what I understood, what made sense, what felt right. Struggled quite a bit. As my website will outline, ultimately I came to a crossroads where my ancestry, my personal ancestry, heritage, and culture combined with my theological and psychological studies at that point, and then I became a heathen, for lack of a better phrase. But what I found when that struck me was the understanding of how the guilt and shame that I've, like everyone else, I accepted as part of my growing up, if you will. But then I found that those thoughts and those pieces kind of resided still in my brain, so that when really bad things happened, I didn't have the processing capabilities to do it with. My brain just locked up because we were trying to fit 5 pounds of stuff in a 2-pound bag. And it just locked up. And it wasn't until I started clearing away some of these guilt, shame things that were hiding in the background that I began to have kind of that headspace at the top. And now I could kind of start to tackle this big animal that had just walked into my life and was kind of driving everything about it. So I sat down and I wrote everything down that I thought worked for me. I started giving it to friends, and one thing led to another. I found a process that really worked for me. It's worked now for hundreds of other people. I've been so honored to have passed this knowledge along. So it's really worked out very well.
Yeah, and that's great. And I'd like to, maybe dive into some of that that stuff that you're just talking about there, and try to maybe unravel some of the stuff that was holding you back and keeping you from being able to process some of this stuff, and how you've ultimately gone and you've worked with other veterans and people obviously having trouble coming back and making sense of some of the things that they've seen or done and stuff like that. So maybe we can talk about that and how you work with these veterans to help them overcome these thoughts and these feelings and beliefs.
That's great. Yes, and absolutely, the first critical key that we need to understand is how your emotion, and it's the raw, unbridled emotion, how that can create, unfortunately, it can create more problems because of the chemical composition that it creates in your brain, kind of fight or flight, if you will,
Mhm.
and get this raw reaction. So that the first key that we have to work on whenever we're talking about dealing with something like this is that we have to program to just stop. And that's a big key, is getting people to just stop. Once they stop, my thinking is that we then take a breath. This allows us to kind of clear, hopefully gather a little headspace. If not, at least we can hold fast. We're not slipping back, right? We're holding fast. We stop, we breathe. Once we've gotten those two steps programming, we're talking about coping mechanisms here, right? So we're talking about method. We can feel the trigger coming on. We can feel this visceral type of almost necessary reaction that we know is coming, right? So we've got these two steps so far. We've got stop, all in. We know we've got to just stop. Breathe. This is going to allow us to create, even if it's a minuscule amount, it's still headspace that we can now use to kind of redirect and refocus our energies. My next step is to think. This is where we're going to use that little bit of headspace as to just breaking this down to decide if we're going to walk away or engage. And most often than not, once we've stripped off the uniform and we're out in public, it's really a matter of, we need to walk away. If nothing else, just to let us clear our head and make sure we're thinking straight, but we need to walk away. And so that's challenging. So stop, breathe, think. And then obviously, once we've had that thought, we can now act, whatever that act is that we need to do. So walk away, engage, do something else, redirect that energy to something else. One of the big things, Scott, that came to me as I was going through my learning cycles and figuring out what worked was the understanding of separating, for the first time in my life, separating theology from practice. Okay. And what I mean by that is that we find typically with monotheism, we have kind of a two-face of the whole idea of monotheism, is that there's this theology which says, I believe in a singular God. He is the Almighty, does all the powers of the universe are contained in that entity. That's a monotheistic theology. What everyone knows to be monotheism is not the theology, it's the practice. Okay. So we say, thou shalt not sin. This is one of the tenets but it's programmed in human psychology from before we're born. And I guess in my case, I didn't put any merit into that. I just kind of said, well, yeah, it's the way we all grew up. But there is a difference. There's a difference between a theology, believing in a God, believing in, polytheism is believing in multiple gods, however you want to believe there. When we talk about separating the theology from the practice is when your grandmother told you that doing those kinds of things is a sin and you're going to hell. And grandma's going to enforce it. She's standing there pointing her fingers. She's got that angry face, all of those things. Okay. Most of us we may shuffle it off. We may, try to, yeah, okay, grandma, we got it. But that seed has now been embedded in your head that you have to reconcile. And what most of us do is that we don't reconcile it. We just leave it there. It's not doing us any harm. Keep moving forward. What we don't understand is that our baseline of anxiety and stress is just slowly throughout our life cycle, that's just slowly growing. Okay. So if we had, say, a 4-lane highway to start this game with, we're going to start shutting off lanes of traffic through the brain. Ultimately, we're going to wind up with one. Now we got a jackknife with a semi truck and nobody is going anywhere. And that is a really good analogy when we talk about those events that occur that cause us to just lock up the brain. And that's really what we're trying to get through here. And we're trying to understand how grandma's, for lack of a better phrase now, I don't mean disrespect to grandma by any means, but her self-appointed importance of assigning a guilt factor to you, whether you knew it or not, that you've carried now for X amount of years. And it only becomes important when the rest of the brain accepts this huge trauma, whatever it is, whether it's, death or dismemberment or whatever kind of horrible view it was that created your traumatic event. Now your brain just doesn't have the throughput, for lack of a better word, to process it all because of those nuggets of guilt. And so we have to go in and we have to look at those and kind of go, is this something? Hey, grandma told me that I shouldn't read those magazines where the girls don't have clothes on. Okay. My father used to say, I only read it for the articles. Okay, so ultimately, have I learned my lesson about what grandma said about those magazines? Yeah, they got a real good truck layout this month and talk about something in a truck or something else, right? But I have to address grandma's guilt by figuring out if I learned the lesson that she tried to impart. If I did, or if I determined that the lesson that she was trying to teach is unimportant in my modern day life, we can release that. We're releasing all of these, and a lot of people say when we're going through this, oh, that's so trivial, that doesn't mean anything, that, oh, I've never even thought about that. Well, then why are we talking about it? Here it is 25 years later, and you're still able to tell me about it, whatever it is. You're holding on to something. So what are you holding on to and why? And we have to address those. And as we clear all those out and people come to face with some of them are going to be painful. Yes, it is what it is. But as we clear those away, it now gives us more headspace to now address the elephant in the room and say, all right, I saw horrible things. Those horrible things I saw don't reconcile against what I've been taught as an American, predominantly American, although there are, other first world countries that experience it as well. And that is, I've had this monotheistic practice enforced on me since before birth. And so now I have to reconcile acts of conflict, acts of violence, acts of war against those practices, not the theology. And this is where I think, my discoveries as far as myself, that's where the light really came on, is to say, not the theology. Believing in God, great. Believing in all the text and all the holy text, great. But the practice, where mother said that's a sin, where grandma would not allow us to do this, that, or the other thing. Girls held their knees together because otherwise it was a sin. All of these little bits that we've kind of accumulated over the centuries or decades anyway, they all play a part, particularly those things that you remember. So you sit down with your therapist, and I'm going to use an example, sit down with a therapist and we start talking about it, and you get these little nagging thoughts there. It's like, oh, well, what about this? What about that? Why are we even talking about that? Well, it happened when I was a kid. Okay, so you're holding on to it because we can still talk about it today. And if you can bring it up today, there's something that you think you need to learn from this. The other big key, Scott, that I am critical about is that I think all of our brothers and sisters need a support network. That is so important. It's so important for so many reasons. Being able to have them understand, even if it's a 10,000 foot view, having them able to understand what the veteran is going through, what his mindset is just critical in growth, and how that can be super beneficial for all parties involved. Sorry, I got up on the soapbox.
Yeah,
didn't step down too much.
I'd like to. No, that's okay. I wanted to kind of hear some of the background and kind of your thought process and things that you've gone through, and I kind of want to circle back a little bit. And okay. one of the things that you started off with was talking about those 4 steps: to stop and breathe and think and act, and so I kind of want to maybe get a little. You say we just need to stop, mm-hmm. And so what does that look like? What describe maybe a situation and what does that mean when we just stop and go through those steps? What would that situation kind of look like?
A great example I have is I have a gentleman whom I worked with. It's been a while now, and he's doing great now. Thank the gods. But when I guess in his job, he was essentially accepted a phobia of the helicopters. So he would hear the sounds of particularly heavy laden or heavy loaded birds coming in, and he would trigger. He would get very originally it would be agitated, but then again, then ultimately he would get violent and would just lose his context with reality. And so we talked, and my big thing was with him was he could feel the trigger happen. He could identify, yes, I can hear the chopper. I have this phobia, and it's starting to spin up. My programming was to just stop, and we acted out. We acted out a physical display or demonstration of just stopping, and that's putting our hand up or out, like we're saying stop to traffic, and just in his case, I told him to close his eyes, close his mouth, and just shut down. But don't move. You have to stay absolutely still. And so this programming, and that's what it took. It took a lot for him to program himself to his first action when hearing that chopper. Because now he's a civilian, right? And so the chopper itself is not producing obviously whatever effects the individual had. But and in his case, he also had a wonderfully supportive wife whom worked with us to when she identified him going through these steps, the stop, breathe. Her job, if you will, was to kind of clear the path, to kind of, if there was other people standing around, her job was to kind of advise them, hey, hold on, kind of set the stage so that they could retain relationships, right? Nobody was getting freaked out or anything like that. But his job was to just physically, mentally, intellectually shut down, just stop, arrest everything and stop. And then once we were able to program that, then we programmed the next step, right? Is we say, all right, we stopped. Now I want you to breathe, and I want you to concentrate on your breathing. Don't worry about the chopper. Don't worry about wife. Don't worry about who's around you. Your wife's job is to kind of soothe the ruffle the feather, or smooth the feathers of all those around us. So our job is to stop. And then I want you to take some deep breaths, even, rhythmic, nice, even breaths. And so all we're doing is we're building coping mechanisms. That one of the things that I want to say for you and for all of our brethren, there is no cure for this. You will always retain a very small fraction of this in your brain. It has changed your brain and your processing forever. Our job now is to figure out how we work with it. So how do we change, right? It's no different than becoming a high schooler from becoming a middle or becoming a college student in lieu of a high school student. We're changing the fundamental way of how we do something, right? So instead of getting mom to drive us to hockey practice, now we can drive ourselves. That's a fundamental change, obviously at two ends of the spectrum here, but nonetheless, that's what we think. So I use the word coping mechanism, but coping mechanism says that, this is a temporary product, and that's not what it is. The stop, breathe, think, act, that is a permanent way that you're now going to deal with how your brain is trying to reconcile whatever you saw or did to what you were raised believing, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah. So I like, going through that process and kind of getting a better visual of, what that looks like for, the people who on their own, so I like that, that little process that you walked us through. Now you've talked about a like a shame or a guilt cycle that people. What is that cycle kind of all about, and how do you kind of see people getting through that cycle?
And again, that's kind of what I was looking at in pieces throughout. Is your guilt shame cycle is more or less, this is grandma guilting you into behaving in a different, right? And so that's
going
the
back to
guilt
that,
thing.
yeah.
Right. And so guilt means, all right, scratch that. Shame is done publicly. So that's where everybody stands across the parking lot, points at you and says, you're ugly, you're, bullying, essentially, right? So Guilt is that value to the privacy of your home. Okay, so that's the difference between guilt and shame. Shame is more of a public thing, whereas guilt is more of a private thing. And when you talk about controls, this is really almost the geniusness of the way the architects of modern monotheism, how they kind of made things stick, in that they would use this shame guilt cycle thing, in that, if you were in a public market and there were more of the earlier followers, they would point out and say, that person's not a follower and they're going to hell, and all of these things in a public type of shaming type of effort. And then that person would go home and sit in the privacy of their own home, and maybe have a perfect relationship with God, but in a private relationship. And now you get, but yet the guilt of what those people said and acceptance. This goes to our social order of society, right? Is that, I want to be included. Yes, I believe the same thing they do, but they don't understand it because I've never said anything. All of these guilt pieces then embed in our brain. Some we're able to filter out, and we can say, oh yeah, okay, yeah, no, I'm not going to even think about that. Out it goes. Other things we essentially process, and we don't take time to learn the lesson of whatever it was, and so we just file it accordingly. And then with the aged old posted on the wall saying, we'll make sure we get that done sometime, and we never come back. So these are the things, those things that we've got post-its for. Those things are the things that build up in our lower part of our consciousness, increasing the chemical imbalance. Essentially the pH balance of your brain is being altered by these things, setting your base level of anxiety at a higher level. So again, once the big trauma comes in, whatever that is, whatever that looks like, now all of a sudden the brain just, it doesn't have the capability to do this. And so you find, I mean, so many things can happen, right? You can, because we've now just flushed the brain with massive overload of chemical imbalance one way or another, and the brain doesn't know what to do with it all. So we can start seeing actual physical symptoms. This is, as I mentioned, this is where you'll get twitching or seizure type activities. You can get sick. You can physically get sick. Again, all of these things are because the pH balance in the brain has just fallen off the beam one way or another, right? And it just doesn't know what to do with it. You can also get to where the brain says, no, I don't want this. And we essentially black it out, right? We can just say, nope, I don't want that memory. The downside with it, there's two real levels to blocking out a memory. There's one is a physical block out, which is we literally cut it off the knees and throw it out the door, and that's it. It literally, even under hypnosis or under any biological memory scrape, you could not get this memory back. So it's a block out, total block. The other end is that, yes, we still do have the visual memories of whatever this is. We have the audio, we have the maybe the smells, the feelings, whatever. And we're going to disconnect them from each other, right? So we may have a vignette, maybe a daydream, or maybe even a nighttime dream, where we see a part of these visions, but the smell's not there, or we get just this random feeling, and there's no sight, there's no sound, there's none of the memory is painful. it's only when you start connecting these sensory pieces together that you can start really probably putting that memory back together to a point where it could be dangerous again. And that's where a lot of people try to get through, whereas what they we often see more often than not is as we clear away those other things, as I mentioned, out of the brain, we can now tackle this dragon and say, all right, how do we reconcile the death and dismemberment involved in combat to the monotheistic beliefs that we grew up with here in the United States? Well, firstly and foremost, I'm here to, I guess, what is it when they tell you that they tell you the end of a movie? What do they call that?
Oh, the spoiler
the end of the
alert.
movie before you get a chance to watch it.
Spoiler
Okay,
alert.
so
Yeah.
Okay, so the spoiler alert on this here is that you will never reconcile war to monotheism, to any religion for that matter, because religion and spirituality in general speaks to a harmonious coexistence, right? I mean, that's what religion's all about. It's a coexistence with our deity, our gods, or the spiritual world, whatever you believe, or whatever gives you comfort in believing. Those are the kinds of things that you're going to see really come to fruition once you start nipping all these other little things away. We can address the big dragon in the room, and this is the SBTA, or I call it the Sabatata, but that's just me because I'm horrible with acronyms. So, and again, military, you couldn't have life without acronyms. So,
Right.
Right. So the SBTA, that is for tackling that big dragon in a room, and we've got to get you to stop, because what's happening is when I'm calling you to stop, is you're starting to try to associate sounds, maybe smells in the air, maybe even tastes in the air, right? You're starting to associate multiple senses with what you're seeing or hearing or whatever, right? And this is what's triggering you. So we have to now look at it and go, all right, I want you to stop. And I want you to stop connecting those senses, but B, I want you to just stop. This is why I'm a very strong supporter of an immediate support network, because even children, a lot of people don't give kids credit that they get it. They get it more than we think they get it. And they can help us when we're talking about this kind of event happening in public, where I've got a gentleman who's just needing to stop. His 6-year-old daughter, wonderful little girl. Of course, she's a little precocious, so I'm just going to put that out there up front. But she'll do it. She'll put her hands up in front of her dad and say, he needs a minute. He needs a minute. And she'll just kind of wait it out. And then dad takes his time. He does his breathing. And once he can do that breathing, then, he can kind of touch base again with reality, if you will, and allow himself to think through and act. And of course, act as a spiritual leader, I try to always encourage our actions to be more of a retreat, if you will, if nothing else, to evaluate the situation to see what we need to do. But the ultimate goal is to stop that visceral, that raw reaction. And that's really what the stop is about. And it's been very successful. I've been very proud of the men and women whom I've worked with, predominantly military, returning, but I mean, I've certainly done first responders, worked with first responders, police, law enforcement, fire, even some EMTs, and just getting kind of that PTSD, if you will, under control.
Yeah, and it really just seems like it's about just kind of grounding yourself and getting in that more present in the moment and just really thinking about what the situation is going around you, like the person that you're talking about with the helicopters and the noise from it and things like that. Maybe there was an experience where the helicopters had a a traumatic experience for this person, and but now when you're home and a helicopter flies overhead, that's not something that's going to be a threat to you, or whatever. So if you can stop and just kind of remember where you are, think about what's going on around you, and be like, okay, you know what, helicopters have flown over hundreds, thousands of people and never been an issue. I'm okay, I'm safe here. And then you can uh, going through your process, or then you can act appropriately and not overreact to the situation, and let that get out of control. So I like that. I like that that stop, breathe, think, act. It's short. It's 4 short steps, and I think that's easy enough for people to remember. And I think that's a key point too, is that it's not a long drawn out 10, 12 step process where now it's okay,
right
I'm on step 4. I remember what step 8 is, but I forget everything else in between. And it could be a much more anxiety producing situation that way.
And I will admit to you, of all the people I've worked with and the struggles, the first step is the hardest to get. But I can tell you, I've had people, hundreds of people, and we'll go through and we'll just struggle to get the stop. I mean, and it's just so hard because you've got visceral, raw emotions that are powering this, and it's so I get it, but I can tell you, of all the people whom I've worked with and over the years, once they get step 1, 2, 3, 4 happen in like a week, it's done. It's just like, oh yeah, because now it's just arresting that initial gut visceral reaction, putting that in check, and then stop, breathe is an obvious thing. And what I always tell people is, or what I teach is, to exaggerate. So when we talk about stopping, I teach them to do, put your hand up, put this clues in any support folks you have who are close by, realize, oh, okay, we've got a situation here. But it's an indicator to you that this is what we're doing. We are consciously going to stop. And then again, you're going to take big breaths. A couple of different reasons I want you to take big breaths. Big breaths, obviously, time, right? You're getting some time to kind of process through. But more importantly, you're getting oxygen to your brain, almost to overload the brain with oxygen, which is going to help us to reestablish the pH balance within the brain. So our chemistry is going to go back online, right? We haven't tipped it one way or another. So that's the other reason that we're going to take those big breaths. Not, and I don't stipulate, or I certainly don't dictate, oh, you need 8 steps and 8 breaths and no, I want you to take as many breaths as it takes for you to feel like now you can think, whatever that means. Some people I know, one of the gentlemen I worked with, I gave him a hard time about it because I guess he was in the SEALs.
Okay.
And one of the things their tests or whatever is that they can hold their breath for like ever. I mean, they take a breath. They're serious. I mean, they could put out forest fires with those breaths. I mean, it was just like, and I told him, I said, all right, this is what I want you to do. I want you to take this as big a breath as you can. This is before I realized what was going on. And he took a breath and he kept inhaling. He kept inhaling and he kept inhaling. And I'm like, okay, that's enough. I mean, I'm sure you got enough air in there. Like, okay, let that one out. Let's try it again. Okay, that's all you need. You only need about half of that. Again, the goal is that we're consciously going through, and I think you hit a very good, very positive part of what this is about. We're going through a very quick steps to get from panic mode to a conscious decision to move forward or back or whatever we've decided. And that's really my hope when I work with the people I've worked with, is that, okay, guys, this is what all I want you to do is every time you start triggering, anytime you start feeling this way, here are your steps. I've worked with people on the same note who start feeling very sad. They're depressed. They have, a lot of them have survivor's guilt. Lots of buddies who we left over there. I understand, been there, done that. But here's the thing. In much the same exact way, we need to do the same exact steps. We need to stop. We need to arrest all of our feelings. Just stop. We need to breathe. We need to put oxygen back in the brain. Because what happens in some cases is you get into a cycle where you can hyperventilate, right? You get that quick breathe, that quick shallow breath because you're starting to stress out. We need to arrest that. We need to stop that. We need to take those big, long, exaggerated breaths. Just calm ourselves, get into our thoughts. And recognize that, those guys who didn't get home are counting on us to retell their story. I mean, we're their legacy, if you will. And I mean, and so we just got to get that back into our thought process and say, all right, I'm living for this guy, for my brother or my sister who we left over there. I'm going to go out and do a barbecue and we're going to invite friends and we're going to do all this stuff, whatever it is. But we need to stop that depressive thought thinking. Big breaths, get oxygen back in the brain, reestablish the pH balance to kind of best represent them. And then we do that. That's the act. So stop, breathe, think, act, done. It has been so successful. Again, after we get past that original stop, to get on with their lives. And one of the things, like I say, and I even say it on a couple of my web pages and certainly the maybe even the Podmatch thing, which really drives me crazy because I say it's coping mechanisms. And that phrase just drives me crazy. So I'm going to come around and tell you that it's really not coping mechanisms. It's a different way of thinking. Because coping mechanisms, again, as I said, it indicates that it's a temporary fix, a Band-Aid, and that's not what we need.
Right.
We need to adjust our way of thinking to adjust for what happened to us over there, over wherever, and we need to adjust our way of thinking so that we can be successful even with this new knowledge, new wisdom, new vision, for lack of a better.
Right. And I think that this is it's a good, like I said before, it's a good, quick, short process. And obviously it takes practice. It's not something that, you're just going to, snap your fingers
of all the
do it
people
overnight.
that I've worked with online, in person, wherever. Yeah, and I think you actually said it very eloquently in the beginning of the show, or a little bit ago, in that this is not a 12-step program. This is not a 10-week endeavor of recovery. That's not what it is. It's 4 quick steps. And again, from your heart, from each of our brothers and sisters who are going through this, their hardest part is going to be step 1. But once they make it over that, the rest they will find comes much easier. And then the key is, a lot of people say, oh, we'll just educate our brother or sister who's coming back. And then their support network, their family, is kind of on their own. And that is like the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, because our family is literally our lifeline to our physical reality. So to have them as part of the solution and as part of the ongoing mechanism to kind of keep us moving forward, absolutely critical, irrelevant of their role in our world, whether it be a spouse, girlfriend, kids, parents, aunts, uncles, anybody who wants to be involved needs to understand, the paradigm shift that veterans have to make when they come back, because that's really what it is, right? We have broken. We go to overseas and essentially break our belief system that we've had since birth. And now we're coming back and we're trying to reconcile that. But more importantly, with support networks and the people that are close to us, they don't have that paradigm break. They didn't go and see what we saw. So they're back in the old ways. And so now we're trying to go, okay, how do I talk to those people and still do what I need to do? And so that's kind of where this process of getting them involved in the Stop, Breathe, Think Act, get them involved in what their roles are when they're seeing an event that, and again, it's an exaggeration by teaching the veterans to exaggerate the steps. That way, we can get the support network personnel, get them in there, and they know now, oh, hey, he's doing this, I need to do this. She's doing this, now I need to kind of watch her back while she processes. And that's really how it works. And I can tell you, I get calls, emails all the time of, a family that I worked with a long time ago, very, very bad, I guess, because not only did he return from conflict with very bad PTSD, but she was, I want to say, an emergency room nurse or a NICU nurse, something. And so she had her own PTSD of doing that. And so they came together and it was like World War III, right? It's just one of those nuclear shells going off right in the middle of that relationship. And they had 2 children, 2 very young kids at the time. They just got an email from them a couple of days ago that they were all going to France. That was, they had decided when they had finally got through where they felt comfortable being away from their base of operations. Their first place they wanted to go was France. And so they were actually able to book the flight. They were getting ready and they were all excited. Kids are much older now, but now they're really going to experience France. So that'll be fun for them.
Well, good for them. Yeah.
So it works. It does. I guess, long story short. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it does. It has some great success stories that you talked about there. And I think this could be definitely helpful for a lot of people. So, hopefully the people who are listening to this can put some of this into practice. But for the people who might want to reach out to you and get a little more information or find out more about what you do, where can people go to get in touch with you and find out about everything that you do?
Actually, thank you for asking. My website, obviously everything stems around a website nowadays, right?
Right.
http://akuvhefner.com, and that's AK for Alaska. Uv, E is ULFHEDNAR.com. Alaska Uv Hefner. My webpage please understand that my first love, my first role, my first passion is spirituality. I'm a spiritual guide. And so that's kind of where all that page, a lot of that page will focus on. It will also give you a lot of ways to get a hold of me, a lot of different kind of formats, whether you have a question or whether you need understanding, or maybe even to book some time with me. All of that's available on that website. It's kind of a center of our universe, if you will. And again, if anyone needs any ongoing support and just words of I guess encouragement, for lack of a better word, tweet the Alaska Ulf Hefnar. We produce a podcast, comes out every Sunday morning. Speaks to it's more spiritual based, but as I mentioned, I am not a monotheist. I am animist, polytheist. I'm Norse, man. I come from 18 generations of Danes, so it is what I am, and I'm 100% proud and happy of that. But again, if folks need more information, they can catch me on the weekly show as well. We do an everyday kind of a follow-up questions from the podcast. We do on a platform called Wisdom, and the Wisdom app is for iOS right now. Android is coming, but it's not here yet. But again, we kind of answer the questions that we get about the Sunday show. We answer every weekday on Wisdom. But yeah, so if people have questions, people have again, I'm not here to convert you. So if people are coming to my website and hoping that I'll convert them to a pagan or a heathen, that's not what I do. I recognize spirituality for what it really is. There's a lot of insight on my page. I recognize monotheism. I recognize polytheism, animism, all of the spiritual understandings. It all makes sense to me. I get it. But anyway, They can go to that website and get tons of information about that. And I am working at putting up, we used to have another webpage. We're moving all of our stuff over to Uv Hefnar now. And I anticipate we should be having the psychological side of all of this discussion that we've had today will be available on Uv Hefnar. I would say within the next couple of weeks. I'm hoping.
Okay.
Hoping.
All right. Well, I will have links to all of this in the show notes. So anyone who is looking to get in touch or find some more information out about anything that we talked about or any of this stuff, there'll be those links in the show notes. So you can check it out there. Mark, thank you again for coming on the show and joining me and chatting about this. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to kind of seeing more about what you're up to in the future.
Well, thank you for having me. I sincerely, I know a lot of times, and I'll just call it like it is. A lot of times when you're outside the mainstream, if you will, with beliefs, particularly with spirituality, a lot of times you are shunned because uncertainty brews obviously questions. So by folks willing to take a step outside the mainstream, I think there are some definite solutions that have worked for me and have worked for many people whom I worked with. And it really doesn't matter what ultimately you believe from a spiritual theology side. It matters that you're willing to do 4 easy steps to regain your life. And that to me is more important than being right, being wrong, whatever. I mean, it's just, if I can give somebody hope that they can get to their next objective, whatever that is, that means I win.
There you go. I think that's a great way to look at it. And with that, I think we'll wrap this one up. But I appreciate you taking the time to come on and share your story with us. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott. And to all your listeners, I wish you happy holidays. They're coming up, I guess, here in the States. And just enjoy your lives. You are a gift. You are a wonderful gift and a wonderful intersection between where you were born and where you will end up. And you are the perfect place for you. So be happy. At the words of Bobby McFerrin, be happy.
Be happy. Thanks for listening to the Drive On Podcast. If you want to check out more episodes or learn more about the show, you can visit our website, driveonpodcast.com. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube at Drive On Podcast.